All right, we are live on YouTube.
All right. I'll start. Good morning, everybody. I'm Tony Lathrop. I know most of you from many meetings of this advisory committee. I am the chair of the Citizens Advisory Committee, and I'm introducing myself because we've got some guests today from the tree ordinance stakeholder group who are just sitting in on our meeting, and we welcome you all and thank you for all of your time and effort and engagement in this process. Just by way of quick introduction, I chair this advisory committee and have done so for however many years we've been doing it, I guess at least 3 years. And before that, I was on the Planning Commission and chaired the Planning Commission and served on that board for 6 years. And now, and in doing that, developed great relationships with the staff and great interest in this project. So stuck around to chair this advisory committee. Now I am a member of the North Carolina Board of Transportation. So I've still got an important connection around land use and transportation in this region, and am involved in a lot of the transportation and planning initiatives going on in this part of the world. I want to thank the staff for all the work they continue to do to make this process so good. Ever since the time on the Planning Commission, I've said that the process as critical as the substance of the work that we're doing, and that if we have a process that is inclusive and rigorous and transparent, that it will lead to a great for Charlotte. And the team with the city has really taken that to heart and done great work around the process. And this group is one huge significant part of that. But there's also been tons of other inclusive work and engagement work around reaching out to people all over the city about this process. So I want to again thank and commend the city and the staff, and to thank all of you all who are here today for your ongoing time and effort and engagement in this process. It's very important work for our city and for the vision of how we want to be in the decades to come. And I firmly believe that when we're done, we'll be able to point and that it will be a model for everybody everywhere who does this kind of work of how to successfully engage people and come up with a great result. And we're doing a lot of our sleeves and doing some hard work, and I think it's really bearing fruit. So I just want to thank everybody and appreciate everybody involved in this for that good work. And turn it over, Allison. I'm going to turn it over to you now. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Tony. Thanks for your leadership and inspiring words. We always appreciate just your support for this process and for the UDO. So thanks, Tony. As Tony mentioned, we've got a little larger group today. So this is part of a 2-part series on trees. And so today we're going to spend some time talking about TCAP, with Tree Canopy Action Plan, that stakeholder process, and some of the results and recommendations that came out of that stakeholder work. And so for those that are on the TCAP stakeholder committee, this will all be reviewed. This is all work that you put a lot of time and effort in, and we appreciate that. This is the first time that our Ordinance Advisory Committee has seen any of this. And so, we've invited you here so that you can answer any questions or provide any perspective for the OAC members. This is the first time that they've seen any of this work. So, I wanted to mention too, if you're on whatever committee, if you're welcome to rename yourself and just say, John's, dash OAC or whatever it is, whatever committee that you're a part of, if you would like. It's a little harder to know who's on which group when we're doing these virtual meetings like this. But so if you'd like, you're welcome to do that. And I think that's it. I will then turn this over to Alan and just appreciate everyone's time and effort. Oh, I wanted to mention real quick, a welcome to Jane. So Jane's the new executive director for Tree Charlotte. And so Chuck Cole, her predecessor, was very involved in the tcap efforts. And Jane is joining the tcap stakeholder group as a Tree Charlotte representative. So and with that, I'll turn it over to Alan. And thanks to everybody for being here today.
Thanks, Allison and Tony. Just a couple of quick housekeeping slides, our usual. We are live streaming this meeting on the department's YouTube channel, and we will also have a recording available on our YouTube channel as well as on the charlotteudo.org website after the meeting is over. And staff will narrate the slides today. We'll monitor the chat feature of Zoom as we go through the meeting, and we'll try as best we can to keep up with the chat comments and questions live, but periodically we may stop and try to catch up with chat as well as take any verbal questions or feedback you may have. Please use the raise hand feature if you want to speak up at the appropriate time. We'll stop and do that at least at the end of the slides, if not at some point in between. And then once we get finished, we'll just kind of open up the floor as we usually do for questions and comments and discussion of the material that we've seen. So at this point, I will turn it over to Andrew Ossel to introduce today's topic.
Thanks, Alan. Echoing what Allison said, it's good to see all of our tcap stakeholders out here again. Good to see you guys after a little hiatus. We talked all last year. And so really as a sort of finishing touch, we're going to talk about what we did in the Tree Canopy Action Plan project and run through sort of the recommendations that are going to bear implications for the standards that we ultimately come up with for the UDO. So if you can go to the next slide, Alan. Just to give you guys a roadmap of where we're going to go today, we're going to focus on three things. One, what was the data analysis that we did? What did we see in the tree canopy data? Two, what did we hear in public engagement? And then thirdly, what sort of recommendations are in the tcap report? And then from there, obviously questions are welcome on any of the content that we're going to discuss, but also sort of, I think we just wanted to say here that there will be more conversation on the actual standard. So if you want to see, a concept in more detail or more built out of what exactly we're going to propose, that's coming on April 27th, where we actually walk through the tree article and the concept. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to my tcap compatriot, unless Allison has something to say.
Yeah, I was just say May 27th.
Oh, wow. Great catch. That's not the first time I've done that. Yeah. Thanks, Walter, as well. May 27th. Yeah, big miss. Sorry. I'll hand it over to Tim Porter, our chief urban forester, who was our co-leader in this tcap effort. So Tim, it's all yours.
Thanks, Andrew, and good morning, everyone. Thank you for your work, both OAC and tcap stakeholders and project teams. Very important, and I look forward to discussing this today and on May 27th. We're not going to go back in time to do that, but we're looking forward. And I'm going to kick off just a really brief history. Charlotte has a long, impressive history on major policy and tree canopy initiatives from all areas. And this is just a quick summary of some recent work. 2017 being a very pivotal moment in Charlotte with the adoption of the Urban Forest Master Plan, which was led by the city arborist office and the tree canopy program manager, Aaron Oliverio, and really created a blueprint. Working with Tree Charlotte, there was a lot of community engagement in that project, high level game plan on how to guide the planting, preservation, and growth of Charlotte's canopy. In 2018, and also spilled into 2019, there was an internal and city council work team or effort to look at the canopy goal. And for those who aren't familiar, the current City of Charlotte tree canopy goal is 50 by 50, which is to attain 50% coverage of the city of tree canopy by the year 2050. And, this effort really looked into vetting and reviewing if that was still viable, if that was still the policy and the goal we wanted to move forward. And one of the final determinations of that effort was to really need to look at this in a higher level approach as part of the Charlotte 2040 comprehensive plan effort. And in 2019, as part of the Unified Development Ordinance, in the early days, the city worked with the community and this committee, and there was an implementation of a text amendment focused on urban sites, providing more flexibility for planting and preservation on urban sites, which were very challenging to work through. And so between 19 and 20, it doesn't show on this slide, but I do want to credit Tree Charlotte for completing a citywide tree canopy analysis that was very informative and helpful for the tcap. There are a lot of good analysis there that we based our secondary, really in-deep analysis on. So many thanks to Tree Charlotte for sharing that with us and getting it done. And now throughout 2020 and today, we're on the tree canopy action plan and sharing some of the results of that effort with this group. So, next slide, please. So staying high level with tcap and moving clockwise on this slide, some of the main focus of this initiative was to really get as much honest, open dialogue in the community as we could. Trees are very important to Charlotte. That history goes back to, deep into the previous century and before. And we really wanted to have an open, honest, at times if it needed to be awkward and challenging, we needed to do that. Community dialogue about trees and what type of tree regulations we wanted to see. Build consensus as much as possible in the areas that we could. Really work off of the Urban Forest Master Plan guidance. And today, I do want to take a quick moment to emphasize that tcap is not just focused on development regulations. Of course, today, that is our focus. And it was a very, very big part of tcap. But the other two buckets that I often think about it for tree canopy policy is the non-regulatory stuff, such as strategic programs, the partnership with Tree Charlotte, that could be city tree planting programs, community assistance programs, and the other bucket would be canopy care and maintenance, both from a public and from a community-driven perspective. And of course, today we're focused on regulations, given the focus of this committee. But there are some very big policy recommendations in those other two areas as well. And we wanted to have kind of a landing page for interested stakeholders to clearly provide guidance and information on what we're doing and build off of that in the future. So we hope to build off of the tcap website and all the engagement work that was done to support some work that's outlined in the master plan that says there needs to be a canopy team, a public-driven, community-driven kind of Friends of the Forest group. So that's related to that aspect of the master plan. And there's also a data analysis component of this initiative. So moving on to the next slide. I really love this graphic. And as you can see on the top right of that tree, again, we're focusing on ordinances and development regulations, but I want to emphasize that tcap firmly rooted and based off the guiding principles proposed in the comprehensive plan. That's an ongoing initiative right now. So definitely focused on regulatory issues, but there's those other two buckets as well. Okay, next slide, please. So a little bit about the stakeholder group for TCAP. Much like this committee, there was a wide range of perspectives from multiple organizations, development, kind of community advocates, environmental and natural resource advocates, neighborhoods, other government agencies. So that's a list of all the participating organizations and stakeholders as part of the TCAP team. And next slide. I'm not going to spend too much time talking about our stakeholder process, but it ran throughout most of 2020 into early 2021. And that team put a lot of work into listening to the data analysis results we have, the community feedback, and helped guide recommendations for both the comprehensive plan and the UDO. And some key themes that came out of that was the need for flexibility and clarity in development standards, the quality of tree canopy. 50 by 50 is a goal that has a little bit more focus than just 50% coverage, but by and large, it's a one metric goal. It says half the city is covered by a tree canopy. And there was a great interest among TCAP stakeholders to look at what quality, like what's the quality of that canopy. And then of course, more awareness and education across all spectrums of tree canopy policy areas and resources to implement programs from both the city and the community-driven perspectives. So, thank you. Okay, so digging into some analysis. Again, this is data on the right there. That beautiful kind of pink purple screen shows existing tree canopy and areas of change. That's taken directly from Tree Charlotte's canopy analysis. The big takeaway is the canopy's declined. And I'll take a moment here to describe the canopy analysis approach. It was a change analysis, and the data sets that were analyzed comprised the window of 2012 to 2018. So the snapshots of the canopy from 2012 and 2018 were compared using high-level GIS analysis using LiDAR and aerial imagery. Some interesting things we found is that previously we thought we were about 47% for many years. This recent analysis determined we were actually at 49% in 2012. And from that time to 2018, which is the most recent available data set that could be analyzed for tree canopy, the results were that canopy declined 4%. So 4% equates to a percentage point's about 2,000 acres. So it's a significant decline. And so that's a big takeaway. The other big takeaway is we actually were higher than we thought. Most of that loss occurred in residential areas. And those are areas that are primarily single family in nature. And most of that loss occurred in non-subdivision development areas, which was eye-opening to me. So that's a big data point and foundation for a lot of the information you're going to hear today and at the next meeting. Of course, canopy losses did occur in every type of zoning area or land use area, and it occurred both from an individual tree basis, but also large swaths, large patches of canopy. And there was also a decline of tree canopy in rights of way, the public street areas, which make up a much smaller portion of the overall canopy, but it's a very important part because that's something the city can directly control and manage to a large degree. So there was a decline in that area as well. Move on to the next slide. So digging into neighborhoods, smaller scale here, these geographies are based on neighborhood profile areas. So those small little neighborhood profile areas, or NPAs, you see in that map on the left, they may be comprised of a single neighborhood in a couple examples, but mostly they're a combination of multiple neighborhoods. They're geographically pretty large. And you can see there's a lot of orange on that, which indicates loss. So most NPA areas suffered loss. And there's a concentration of loss in the South Charlotte area, especially from uptown heading south and southeast to kind of towards 485, but certainly towards Pineville Matthews Road. There are a couple of areas of canopy increase, and we can explain that. Some of those are directly related to conservation areas the city acquired and is protected. There's also, again, this is going back to 12 and 18, there's some remnant timber operations and pine plantations that have increased in canopy coverage. The main losses, again, focusing on residential areas, are related to aging canopy, major storm events, infill development, new development, and property owner decisions. And this is an area that we will be focusing on going forward to make sure we have a good grasp on canopy changes and impacts in those areas. Okay, next slide. But again, it's not just in residential areas. So this is a snapshot that hopefully conveys that all types of canopy decline and changes are happening across the spectrum in different areas. On the right, there's a list. You can take that orange arrow pointing to an orange blob, or red arrow pointing to an orange blob, which indicates a patch of tree canopy that was removed. The first one, assisted living facility and hospice center, that development occurred from 12 to 18, and a largely wooded site was lost most of its canopy. The second one down is a green area. That's a city conservation area. It's the Doe Creek Conservation Area that in 2012, it had 0% canopy. Essentially, there's a little bit of canopy along a stream that runs through the property, but from 12 to 18, the trees expanded and grew. So that's an example of how canopy, of course, grows. And this analysis picked it up on multiple scales, both individual trees. We're not going to show any graphics today, but the canopy analysis that was conducted by Tree Charlotte in partnership with the U.S. Forest Service and the University of Vermont got very detailed. You can zoom in to that data and see individual trees that showed growth, but also there's large patches. The next two items below that indicate larger swaths, which are single family subdivision development. So I really want to make sure everyone's aware that loss is occurring in every type of development area, but also every type of land use area as well. But also there's growth. And the next one down is just a private property. I don't know the history of it, but it's probably some remnant farmland from decades and decades ago, but it's individual property that canopy growth expanded and helped reduce the loss of canopy. And then the final one is a larger swath related to school development. So anyway, just a snapshot to let you know that this analysis was very detailed and it looked at every type of element across the spectrum of canopy and development. Okay. And digging into more specific, scales, neighborhood scales. So here's Greer Heights, an urban core older neighborhood. What you're seeing here is those orange blobs represent tree canopy loss from 12 to 18. The yellow dots indicate building permits. So this is a type of permit area the city doesn't regulate through land development permitting. The green trees indicate the city's tree maintenance work orders in this neighborhood over that time, specifically focused on tree removal. And this is an area that related to the canopy decline we saw that we wanted to dig in more at and start looking at causes. So this just shows you that we're looking at that data and we're trying to get a better grasp on how the things that are going on in these areas are impacting tree canopy. Next slide, please. Breaking it out by zoning, as you can see there, this indicates loss of tree canopy. So single family residential, 65%, the biggest bulk of overall tree canopy loss. So that was the biggest area of tree canopy, the source of tree canopy. So it's not strange to see that it's an area of biggest loss. It was starting to have the most canopy, and so it had the most to lose. And there was a lot of development in that area from 12 to 18, both from a subdivision perspective and more of an infill perspective. There's also a lot of areas that are single family in nature that have an aging canopy reality. So there's a lot going on there that impacts tree canopy. In other areas, saw significant losses as well, industrial and multifamily. But just, to help paint the picture and inform this group on what we're seeing as far as tree canopy loss. So overall, let me just throw some numbers at you real quick. Overall, the canopy analysis said that the net loss was about 7,600 acres of tree canopy. There were some gains, so overall the loss was about 9,800, but if you factor in the gains of tree canopy, about 2,100, that gives us our 7,600 acres of tree canopy loss from 2012 to 2018. And there is a canopy analysis available on Tree Charlotte's website. I encourage you to check that out and get you a little bit more specific details. And we can share that too with this team if needed, if interested. So next slide, please. So at this point, I'm going to shift it back over to Andrew, and he's going to talk a little more about public engagement.
Yeah, thanks. I'll take that, but I think maybe taking on John's question in the chat might be good as while we're on data. And I think we have a good answer for that. So the question is quantitatively, is there more loss in areas of new development or in areas of existing development? And the way that I perceive that question is what you mean by existing development is sort of this type of canopy loss is not happening in development situations. It's something that's already been developed. There's a property owner living or working on the property and sort of the canopy loss in that. Is that what you mean by existing development, John?
I think, did he reply yes? Is that what I see in the chat?
Yeah, yep.
Okay. Yeah, and I can elaborate a little bit from the tree ordinance perspective. The city doesn't currently regulate single-family development beyond subdivision. So if a new subdivision triggers plan review requirements and development regulations, and then the tree ordinance development requirements are applied. Generally, infill development types, demo and rebuilds, things like that. That's not something the city looks at all. So that's kind of a baseline for the view of existing developments where we saw a lot of the canopy loss. There certainly is tree canopy loss, and some of those clear-cut things that the community advocates have mentioned as pain points, that certainly occurs with single-family subdivision, new development. But most of the canopy loss was not in that area; it was an existing development. Hopefully, that clarifies.
Yeah, and I think the other part of that answer is we definitely had some blind spots in what we could analyze. So, we saw tree canopy loss in neighborhoods, just sort of in small patches, kind of like Tim was showing in Greer Heights. But we didn't really maintain the building permit data to say, this loss was occurred in, relation to this building permit or this, and so we couldn't really parse out the data at that level to say, can it be from development where you're adding maybe in addition to your building or even tear down, rebuild, or whatever you're doing in development. We couldn't really separate that from, say, a property owner who just decided to cut down a tree. So that's one of the limitations of the data. I think that maybe we want to do more data analysis and get better information in that in the future. But I think that answers your question. And another question is from Warren Cooksey. I don't know if Tim, if you have the answer to this one. This is also about data, but where does Charlotte's tree canopy rank percentage-wise? Where does the percentage rank among the largest cities in the country? And does any other large American city currently have 50% tree canopy?
Mute button's really hard to find sometimes. But yeah, I could answer some of that, I think, definitively. Charlotte's tree canopy ranks extremely well. It's a little bit subjective, right? There's no universally accepted criteria that really ranks tree canopy from one city to another. There's a lot of variables, right? Cities, west of the Mississippi River, Arizona, California, very different ecological situations there. So naturally, tree canopy in some cities like that is going to be much lower from the natural, forested condition. But Charlotte's, being in the eastern side of the country, they say that at one point a squirrel could go from the beach on the coast of the Atlantic Ocean to the Mississippi River, never touched the ground. And that's kind of what Charlotte's reality was pre-colonial. So right now, Charlotte's tree canopy is ranked in the top 10 by American Forests, which is one of the leading national urban forestry focused nonprofits. They have a lot of community driven programs. So they rank Charlotte as one of the top 10 tree canopies in the country. And that's related to just basic coverage, community interest and value, regulations, is there a nonprofit or tree focused advocacy group, things like that. Coverage wise, up until a few years ago, we had the greatest coverage of tree canopy of any major city. We are slightly, well, I take that back. We are below Atlanta now. Atlanta and Charlotte were neck and neck based on the data I was aware of and what was available. So right now we're probably in that second or third place from coverage perspective based on the available data, right behind Atlanta. So no American city that I'm aware of, major American city, has more than 50% canopy. There are many cities that do, but something that's as dense and urban and certainly growing like Charlotte, no one has close to 50%. And in fact, American Forests, that leading nonprofit, kind of de-emphasized their canopy coverage percentages as a primary kind of goal setting and rating tool. 40% canopy coverage used to be their standard recommendation, when they were working with cities and towns on tree canopy goals and analysis. And it's not something that they apply anymore universally, because there's so many individual variables for each city. Again, West Coast versus East Coast development, historical development, how did that city develop? New York City has no ability to have 50% tree canopy coverage just based on its density. It doesn't make sense to recommend 40% for a city like that. So hopefully that helps answer Warren's question.
Yeah, that's good. Both good questions, give good context there. But just continuing on in the presentation, I'll say, now that you've been looking at the slide for a while, you get the gist of it. We did really kind of three main engagements with the public to get their feedback. One was a survey. I think the questions probably was 10 questions. It had some video components walking through characteristics of the canopy and sort of how we're approaching each of the questions. It gave good context for people that weren't in the tree world. And what we heard there was kind of what you see there. And we highlighted the number 3 there, the need for increased protections on private property for tree protection. So really getting into those the tree loss in those areas where there may not be development happening, but just a property owner's decision and sort of doing more to either protect or mitigate for loss of trees in those areas. And then the neighborhood roundtables was a series of conversations that we had with neighborhood leaders from the neighborhoods you see listed there. We tried to be as geographically spread out as possible to really get a good geographic distribution of neighborhoods. And we had a lot of really great conversations, kind of testing concepts with them, getting the reactions. It was a really, kind of almost like a focus group that was really, really helpful for us. And, getting reactions to possible regulations or possible policies that we were hearing about through public engagement and through stakeholder conversations. And then we had one public meeting, as you see there, where we engaged people just sort of on everything we've been talking about and just have an opportunity for the general public to have a conversation with us about trees. Next slide. And this is zooming in a little bit to the survey on a question that we asked about a possible city regulation that would protect healthy mature trees from being removed by homeowners and business owners. And we saw strong support from the survey respondents. So that definitely had an impact on our work. And we just wanted to highlight that as a key data point in this process. Next slide. Another big part of our work was to look at peer cities. So, Warren's comment is sort of well received that, we did look at what other cities are doing. And the 4 model cities you see there all are kind of in the southwest or southeast, sorry. And, of different sizes and they definitely all had different approaches, but you see the list of things that we looked at. We compared, the cities themselves and demographics and size, and then also in sort of what their approaches are. And we found some interesting stuff. You can go to the next slide. So the kind of high level takeaways that we want to highlight, and I'll let Tim jump in if he wants to, but the big takeaway was that we saw that all peer cities had special designations for larger trees, special high value trees that were protected at different scale, at different levels. I mean, Raleigh's approach was definitely different than what you see in DC, and Raleigh and DC are also very different cities. So we saw a good diversity of approaches, but there is that consistent theme of protections for larger trees. All peer cities have partnerships to encourage tree planting and preservation, really trying to get at that programmatic recommendation that, hey, regulations are important, but what are you doing with the community and nonprofits to get trees out into yards and maybe encouraging, having programs to maintain the trees that we have and helping people afford preservation of large trees in the community was an important factor. And then the last was that all cities promoted residential preservation of large, healthy, mature trees. And then where removal was authorized, we really saw that replanting of different types of trees and fees were a consistent theme throughout. And I see a couple of comments. I've not read through them all, but Tim, if you have anything else to add there.
I wanted to maybe touch on one of the questions I saw about HB 496. So I know there may be some folks from the attorney's office on the call, but in general, I just wanted to share some information about that House bill. It's my understanding that that bill, which I'm not sure if it's in committee or not right now, but Charlotte's situation, we have a local act here that explicitly allows Charlotte to have a tree ordinance. I'm generalizing here, and hopefully any attorney on the call will jump in and clarify if they need to, but it's our understanding from the city's perspective is that that would not impact Charlotte's situation given the specific language in that bill about a local act. So we feel that the tree ordinance and what will become the tree article of the UDO, we should be fine. We don't have any significant concern about that right now. So, but to add to the takeaways, Andrew, no, I don't have much to add there. I think you covered it well.
Yeah, and I'll just say John's comment, about public-private funding of tree planting. I think that is something we definitely want to do. We do that already somewhat, but we want to expand on some of those opportunities working with Tree Charlotte and our partners. So comment is well received. Joe Padilla's comment: how does the city balance its goal of a 50% tree canopy with the goal of expanding availability of housing for workforce? Yeah. It's an interesting, it's something we had always talked about in TCAP, and thanks for bringing it back up, Joe. It's something that we're still thinking through about what do we do and how do we get that, because we understand the limitations. And I think we also understand that we want high quality living situations for those that have to live in affordable situations. And so trying to balance that is something that we're really trying to work into whatever we recommend. Obviously if the only city goal, like I think going back to that data, that map that we saw earlier where you saw major tree loss in South Charlotte, if our only goal as a city was to live in a forested area, you would see tree gains everywhere. But that's just not the case because we are a growing city and there are all sorts of priorities that we need to balance. So we may continue to see tree loss. I think what we try to do in this approach is, where there are competing priorities, allow for innovation, allow for new approaches. And that's what we heard throughout TCAP was we really want to try and allow people to do certain things while also preserving the quality of life in trees where we can. Tim, I don't know if you want to jump in there.
Yeah, I had something to that. I mean, it's a really good question. And the 50 by 50 canopy goal, it was developed at a time where things were very different in this community and in this city. And sure, Charlotte was growing at that time, but it wasn't anywhere near what we've seen the last few years. And looking at that decline that we saw from 12 to 18, it's really time. And following up on the TCAP initiative, the comprehensive plan, the UDO, a next step that we're planning to take starting likely in 2022 is to update the urban forest master plan and tree canopy goal, and really have that ultimate, hard, difficult, challenging, open discussion on, is 50% still the right way to go? Is a coverage goal still the most appropriate thing? Look at quality, look at where canopy is needed most. The benefits, is it better to have 50% canopy if it's all concentrated on the outside versus more strategic, goal-focused, balanced, benefit-driven type of canopy locations and things like that. And there's arguments both ways, but I really think it's time to look at that number. And it's very challenging to have canopy growth. We're also going to see a lot of canopy growth in the coming years based on all the trees that developers have planted, that the city has planted through capital projects, and many other individuals and groups have planted or preserved. So it's time to figure out if we're still on the right level as far as balancing all these interests, because we may not be. And there may be enough support to keep 50 by 50, but we really need to find some really good answers and reasons why to keep it, because we're going the wrong way now. We know we've been going the wrong way since 2017. The master plan determined that at that point in time, using older data, the best canopy coverage we could get to was 46%. And so it's time for that hard conversation to see what do we want to do going forward.
Yeah, and I will add, Jane asked a really good question, and I don't know if we have an answer. Maybe Tim. How do peer cities measure coverage goal or other? Do they do the canopy goal percentage? I don't know off the top of my head.
Generally canopy coverage goals, setting them, assessing them, seeing if that metric is being met, is based on a top-down, which is a GIS aerial imagery based goal. There are other tools out there you can use something of a ground up approach. That's where you have a community driven or a contractor go around and do plot sampling. So you do hundreds and hundreds of little plots around the city and measure the specific trees in each plot. And then you would kind of extrapolate out what the canopy coverage is. But by and large, most major cities universally use a GIS based canopy assessment to look at their coverage. There are improvements being made with technology to look at, especially with LiDAR. Going into a little data nerd level answer here. LiDAR can tell you the height of your canopy. It used to be just if it's green, okay, it's canopy, and now is it green? And you could have computers kind of run models and determine it's green, it's 8 inches tall, that's grass, it's green, it's 40 feet tall, that's a tree. So we can differentiate now between trees and shrubs, and it all depends on what you want to define as canopy. So some cities have a definition of canopy down to a height level, and generally that's how it's done across the board. And Charlotte, I can't speak for Tree Charlotte specifically, but I'm very familiar with the contractor and the methodology that contractor used, and that's the approach that they used. Hopefully that helps.
Yeah, and there's a lot of good questions right now on canopy. So I think we have time to go into it. Clayton asked, are there any canopy discrepancies between the canopy and the wedge versus the crescent? And I know we had a possible slide on that. I don't know. I think we hit it, but that's okay. I feel like the canopy is much more lively and dense in the wedge, as a ground level observation. As the formerly industrial heavy areas develop in Druid Hills and Sugar Creek, etc., I feel that these are areas of interest. I don't know what you think about that. I don't know if you know that offhand, the wedge versus the crescent, all that.
I don't have a lot of the data on that in front of me right now, but if you go back up a slide or down a slide to that orange kind of neighborhood break, yeah. So Maybe we should take a moment to explain crescent and wedge to everybody. Does everyone understand what that is, or do you feel good about just moving forward with that answer?
No,
Without kind of,
that's a good explanation, maybe.
well, Andrew, you might be better to answer that. I'm not sure if.
Yeah. Well, I guess maybe I'm confusing terms. There's centers, corridors, and wedges, which is a land use framework. But then there's the.
Right.
I
I
don't
don't think
know.
we're talking about that here. I think Clayton's
Yeah.
talking about
The crescent versus the wedge.
Yeah, this is Alan. I'll jump
Alan,
in.
help us out, please. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll jump in here. You probably can't see my cursor on your screen, so it's a little difficult. But if you see the wedge is basically the area from the uptown area heading directly south, and it kind of follows that the brighter orange color, but it's generally south, the South Charlotte area. And the wedge, if you want to divide the Charlotte land area into quarters kind of with an X, the wedge is the bottom part of the X, and the crescent are the other three quadrants. The wedge being the economically more affluent area of Charlotte, and the wedge being the more diverse and less economically affluent. That's one measure, may not be the most accurate measure, but generally speaking, that's what the wedge and the crescent are. The wedge is the southern portion of that X, and the crescent are the other three quadrants of the X.
Thank you, Alan. Appreciate you jumping in to save us there. So some basic data, basic answer I can provide is that while this map in front of you right now doesn't show it, from a starting point of which areas had more canopy, the wedge started with more canopy. The crescent areas, on average, have less canopy, sometimes significantly less. So that's partially responsible for how you may see on this image that canopy loss is smaller in those areas where they were starting with less canopy to begin with. So there's certainly an equity component here of existing canopy. Let me just take a step back and say, from a canopy goal perspective, it's well understood that we can't regulate our way to canopy goals. There has to be the other buckets, the strategic programming, and my next point is canopy care and maintenance. There's also an equity issue in that area with services, and that's being addressed in the tcap final report. We're not going to focus on that for today's call because it's a non-regulatory thing, but it's just public and community-driven service and support for taking care of the canopy. That's also an issue in those areas. So it's something that we're aware of and looking to address with tcap final report recommendations.
Yeah. Comment from Matt Langston. Charlotte has many areas of substantially aging canopy, including many of our favorite areas. How does the coverage goal consider new trees that will be canopy in 30 years? Are those considered as good, or is it counted as a sparse canopy?
That's a good question. I think it really gets to that concern, which is big for me. If the current canopy goal is really just a one size fits all. I'm generalizing a little bit, but it's really a 50% canopy coverage. And there are a lot of trees out there that are in the young or kind of mid-range to their lifespan. And right now, it's kind of just a cold assessment approach. They're considered canopy coverage for whatever they provide. And if, there's no more focus than that. There's no scale-focused reality as part of that canopy goal. And there's no stocking level goal. Stocking level means, from a city perspective, of all the available street tree planting locations, how many of those locations have a tree? So that kind of, in my mind, I may be extrapolating too much from Matt's question, but in my mind, that's something we should consider on a neighborhood scale, or even a multiple neighborhood scale. How many planting locations have trees in them, and how do we get trees in them in areas that make sense? So it's just counted as part of this. If it's a sparse canopy area, Matt, it's counted as just a component of that sparse canopy.
Yeah. Thanks. The next question is from Walter, and this is a good one because I think this is maybe a mismatch of things. In the place types draft in the comp plan, it prescribes tree save for each place type. Will those ranges of tree save be carried forward into the regulatory ordinance? And if so, how will the actual requirement within the ranges be determined, and who will make the determination? So I will say, I think that's somewhat of a mismatch. So in the comp plan, as a part of the tcap, we came up with those percentages, and they weren't tree save percentages in the concept of you need to save a certain percentage of your site in accordance with this place type. Well, I think that's taking a regulatory idea, and that is the way that we regulate percentages in development situations today. But what we have in place types is more of a canopy goal in the overall place type. So residential had a place type or a canopy goal, and commercial had a different one, and industrial had a different one. So those goals are what we are using, and they are based on one, current canopy, what we have today, and sort of where we expect those place types to go. So understanding that in centers, highly dense areas where there's a lot of development pressure, we understand that we're going to lose some canopy because it's as others were saying, a high priority area for other things like economic development and opportunities and employment. Versus the residential areas where we saw there are yard areas, there are plenty of more opportunities to grow our canopy. And so we maybe prescribed a little bit higher of a goal than what we see today. But everything was based in this canopy analysis and what we saw on the ground and where we sort of expected canopy growth to go. And it's not a tree save requirement percentage as much as it is a sort of goal that we will use to reference in our regulations and how much flexibility we afford to sites. So yeah, just how many trees are need to be preserved on site. I don't know, Tim, if you want to go into more detail on that.
No, I think it's a good answer. Yeah, it's not a regulatory only thing, and it's not a tree save thing. It's looking at the entire place type area, and of course this was based on very, very, very rough initial place type kind of, I don't even say mapping, but just analysis, because the mapping is going to take place later on. It incorporates canopy on private property, canopy in the right of way, the value of street trees in certain types of developments versus tree save, but also just what does an average single family neighborhood have for canopy coverage once it's at maturity, post development, a number of years when preserved or planted trees have had a chance to grow to full potential. So again, not a strictly tree safe thing at all by any means. It covers the spectrum of all those buckets: the regulatory, the programmatic approach, the maintenance approach.
Yeah. And I don't know if Laura want to jump in, but I think we see your questions there, Walter. How it will be translated into the rules. That it is definitely a reference point for us as we look at the regulations, but it's not. It's not something that, one, I don't think we'll talk about today, but two, that will be a direct translation. Like, for example, residential had a really high canopy percentage goal in the place types. We're not going to be requiring 50% tree save on a residential site. That's not general practice today, and that's not where we're going. But, and to get to that 50% goal, in part it's regulations, but also in part it's programs and it's procedure about how we manage our trees as a city, and so it's in part regulations, I think, is the point that I wanted to make there.
And I'll just add, Andrew, I think what you said is really on target. I mean, it maybe, I think, as John Morris was saying earlier, what about also programs and organizations that are maybe involved in planting trees? I mean, so it could help also to prioritize where a tree planting program or organization that's planting trees might focus, what types of areas, to know really, and to know where it's most realistic as we're looking at regulations, and knowing that some of our least dense areas are probably the areas where we do have the most opportunity to get trees in. And as you get into more intense and urban development, we're going to have to look at more and more options for flexibility.
And that's why I think this conversation is really helpful, because, you know, or not tomorrow, next meeting, we'll talk about the regulations. But in all of this, we want regulations are a part of this. And that's the value of this TCAP, is we looked at everything sort of in tandem, and where we're able to relax some standards, say for, you know, a more dense, or where maybe affordability is a more of a priority, we're going to be able to supplement it with strategically with programs and, you know, other opportunities for growing canopy that aren't regulatory. So that's all I'll say on that. I think we were on public. We moved past public engagement. You can go to the next one. Next one. All right, and this is back to Tim.
Okay, so on the next slide, you'll see that this is an outline of policy areas of the TCAP initiative, and the final report from that initiative is organized. And we've highlighted the key policy areas from TCAP that we'll be talking about today and at the next meeting, because they have the greatest connection to development regulations. There's probably some level of connection in all the other areas, but these were the key areas that we wanted to focus the time on with this group today and next week. And again, today we'll be touching on higher level, policy themes and recommendations. And the next meeting, we will drill down in some specific ordinance concepts and language, and really get into that detail level that's going to be applied during permitting. But right now, quickly through policy 1 through 4, all of these areas will have some type of policy recommendation for strategic programs and canopy care, resources, maintenance, and development regulations. But the highlighted ones will have much more focused on development regulations. Utilities and public trees. There's a significant utility management role that the city arborist group works on a daily basis with CDOT, and that doesn't always cross into development regulations. Of course, there's a ton of utility work going on through permitted development sites, but there's a very big bucket of work that doesn't cross into this development regulatory world that those two entities work on. So one example of a non-regulatory thing in policy 1. Policy 2 will certainly have some level of input in the proposed tree article. Policy 3 is going to outline the use of in lieu and mitigation fees, which apply, but it's not a specific ordinance area that we talk about. The fees shall be this, the fees will be applied this way. It's just basically, what do you do with those fees once they've been collected? And so anyway, I just want to give some examples. Didn't want to talk through every single area on this slide, and I think we could move on to the next one. And Andrew, feel free to stop me and interject as needed if there's a question, or if you just have a better opportunity to answer or explain some of these priorities. So policy 5, balancing priorities. I think there's been a lot of interest in this. Traditionally, one area that's been a focus of concern and confusion is just in the tree ordinance, how are projects triggered, especially around tree safe. So there's going to be some proposed changes about simplifying, streamlining, aligning the triggers of the tree ordinance, and making sure it's a reasonable approach, it's understood and clear. And we'll talk more about some specific triggers that may be proposed to be removed in the new tree article. One of the biggest themes throughout all these areas is having flexible options, both from a development customer perspective, but also from a planting and preservation perspective. I think there's opportunities to preserve and plant more trees through the trees article that aren't being considered or provided today. So we want to make sure that there's creative and flexible options. When something's required, that customers and the community can see that realized based on a higher level goal of higher quality and more tree canopy. Also a decision-making matrix. And this is very important for me on a day-to-day from a staff enforcement perspective, but also for customers going through permitting. This is how to decide in a much more effective way how to better understand when trees have to be preserved or planted, and implementing that with a consideration for other interests. And we'll talk more at the next meeting, but there's a lot of work going on related to transportation, sidewalks, to have better guidance for staff and customers on how to determine if a tree should be preserved, when, and how to move forward. So there isn't a reinvent the wheel every time type of perspective, while still valuing the importance of preserving that tree. It's certainly not going to be, okay, trees get removed every time, or trees are going to be saved every time reality. But hopefully that gives you enough, and I'm sure people want more information about the specific language right now, but we'll have much more time to dig in and answer questions and have really good conversations at the next meeting. Andrew, I welcome any additional feedback you want to put out there.
No, that was good. I'm reading Matt's comment, and I think that's totally makes sense. He just suggested exploring a program where the city can plant new trees on private property, focusing on single family, maybe where in a front setback where an existing single family lot doesn't have a tree currently. I think that's a good idea.
I like it. I like the idea, and it really gets into that. Tree canopy goals have to be a multi-pronged approach. We can't regulate our way there. We can't have a strategic program that just gets it done. It's got to be a balance of all these things. And taking care of the canopy has to occur from a public and community-driven approach, because we're okay. We're pretty good about highlighting the need and the reasons why to plant trees. But yeah, I agree. More carrot, incentivize taking care of the canopy. But also, if we're pushing trees, we need to help take care of them too. And I think there's a lot of interest from the city's perspective to expand beyond just the public realm there. I'm not saying we're going to go out there and trim everybody's trees, but strategic programs, working with partners, assistance programs. There's a lot of ideas we're looking to pursue to that effect. Okay, so conservation of ecological assets. Big area. Tree save is certainly one of the biggest development regulations that are receive a lot of focus from all stakeholders interested in tree save, whether it's a customer going through permitting, or advocates or community stakeholders interested in preservation. One of the big things we heard from the public engagement, the TCAP stakeholders, was prioritizing the preservation of trees. A lot of feedback we've received over the last 3 years, going back to that early slide about recent work through the master plan, some of the early city manager meet and eat type of initiatives, and TCAP stakeholder and public engagement work, was among tree priorities. Preservation is almost always the first one, and tree save is the biggest one, I think, along with the preservation of city trees, but tree save is often the biggest one when we talk about the tree ordinance and regulatory requirements. So there's a lot of focus in what we're going to propose at the following meeting on tree save requirements, looking at a balanced approach, looking at a preservation approach that focuses on quality and related to those general canopy goals that we talked about a moment ago on place types. Quality is a big part of that. I think there's a lot of interest from a canopy goal perspective to really pursue more than just a percentage-based canopy goal. A certain percentage-based component of a goal makes sense still, but we can probably focus in a little bit better on quality. That can include species, that can include the preservation of existing forest if it's higher quality. If it's lower quality, maybe it's better to start over and replant. And that leads into the next part of the slide, is just invasive species. Prioritizing the preservation and protection of tree safe areas that they're higher quality with lower invasive species, and maybe providing assistance on that.
Yeah, and I'll say there was a lot of there's a lot of good stakeholder conversations about this topic in particular, good examples. And I know Thomas is on the call, just in conversations we had about, on the ground in a development situation, sort of making the decision where certain trees would be removed, where certain trees would be maintained, and how it may not have been the best quality patch of trees, or how to deal with invasives. So we heard a lot of really good feedback from designers and development customers who had experiences with getting the best quality trees preserved, and I think both the development side, the real estate side, and the community side, maybe those that are more inclined to preserve trees, we're on the same page in that quality was really important. We really want to see good quality, larger trees preserved, and so I think it was a good conversation, and there was a lot of synergy around some of these things. So that's all I'll add.
Yeah, I agree. I think there was more of a long-term focus included on how these tree save areas, they can vary greatly from commercial sites to individual single-family lots that are part of a subdivision to common areas. Just looking at long-term success and quality, focused on the benefits these areas could provide, not just at permitting, let's get this amount of space. Let's get whatever is appropriate for this development type, and let's preserve it, and let's ensure that these areas provide as best possible long-term benefits to the community and to individual projects and sites. And we'll talk in great detail at the next meeting about proposed revisions and changes. It's one of the key themes that we'll focus on the next meeting, Tree Save. Another key theme is street trees, and this primarily looks at public trees, city trees, but it also includes street trees that may be located right outside the public right-of-way. I'm going to start with the bottom item there. When priorities complete, this is a really big focus area for me. So I've been pushing on the project team that we have better guidance on how to evaluate efficiently and quickly when there's competing priorities, and how to take steps forward. So I've done a lot of work with the tcap project team, the UDO team, coordinated with the city arborist office, CDOT, to have better guidance on that for customers and for staff. Moving up the slide, flexibility is a big component of that. Preservation, as I said, is the number one priority among stakeholders for trees, and it also includes individual street trees. But we want to make sure there's enough flexibility provided for customers to reasonably preserve trees, but also be able to build the products that make sense. Sidewalks and space for trees seems to be an ever-growing issue, but I think the city has always done a good job trying to resolve these conflicts and these competing interests, and something that's regulatory driven, but also across those other buckets of strategic programs and canopy care, including capital projects, is making sure that trees are emphasized and always part of any new sidewalk project that's coming in, whatever it's connected to, and ensuring that they're preserved when reasonable, but making space for sidewalks to ensure there's ADA accessibility and appropriate space for pedestrians to feel safe. And we want to have shaded sidewalks as well. So we'll focus on some ordinance concepts that directly address that, along with the flexibility and the process to move through competing priorities.
Yeah, and I'll just add that I think in the place types conversation, it was actually really, really helpful to think through, okay, where are the public space trees in the street right away, really the most important trees we have, and where can we sort of afford flexibility for trees that are maybe farther back on the site, or tree save is often sometimes tucked in the back corner of the site, and those trees aren't of any value in some of our higher commercial or maybe more dense residential areas. And so in those areas, let's grant some more flexibility to do some things that aren't traditional tree save and allow people to build more units or whatever to sort of, maximize on priorities while also providing for the trees that are, shaded walkways and shaded public spaces kind of out in the front of the development. So I think the place types exercise was really, really helpful in thinking strategically through that. And hopefully that comes through when we talk about the regulations next time.
Yeah, that's good information. Thank you. Okay, so this was probably the biggest area for TCAP policy related to development regulations, land development. And we'll talk more. I believe this has already been introduced. And Andrew, maybe you can help out here. The character overlay protections related to trees and tree regulations. That's been introduced to this group before. Is that right?
Yes, we talked a little bit about character overlay approach, and it's just kind of I think a reminder for those when we were back talking about historic districts and character overlays, that a part of that regulation, and I'll let Laura chime in too, but a part of that regulation was maybe allowing certain neighborhoods, if they were, go through the process of setting up this character overlay, allow for, either higher, I think it was higher protections for trees. That was something we heard from a lot of stakeholders, that if our entire, neighborhood wants to preserve a certain scale of tree, we should have options to do that. And I think that's kind of what we were trying to do there.
And Andrew, thank you. I think just to remind everyone, the character overlay is where neighborhoods have unique character that they, as a neighborhood, the majority of the neighborhood choose that they want to preserve. And we thought trees is one area that we could look at, as well as some things that are more standard in zoning, like setbacks or lot widths or some things like that.
The second item, eliminate exemptions and flexibility. I believe that primarily is related to tree save. And this is something that I expect a lot of conversation about and comments on. There's certain areas in the city now and types of projects that have some level of exemption from tree save. And so we'll talk about what type of, eliminating those exemptions, what that would look like, and the flexible options that are provided to kind of balance that out and move forward with tree save being aligned and applied to any type of project that has to go through permitting. And heritage trees, that's as Andrew mentioned in the Pier City component of this presentation earlier, that's something that is very common among the peer cities and many other cities that we didn't include in that Pier City review. Heritage trees and your preservation of individual important trees on properties. So we'll talk about how that might look for Charlotte and proposed article. Again, this is going to be probably the most important area, the most focused area of conversation. And welcome all the comments. I look forward to discussing that. There is some heritage tree documentation, or I should say language in the tree ordinance right now, but it's not something that's often used or applied on both customer and staff. So this will be kind of a new approach. We'll talk more detail about that, how it applies, how it doesn't, and the flexibility provided to that, tree save exemptions, and all the other proposed article, tree article, ordinance concepts. Mm-hmm. And I see Thomas's comment in the chat there, and duly noted, Thomas. I look forward. I mean, this is really, these are difficult conversations, and the OAC group, just like TCAP, has a difficult charge. And so I think we're all aware of that, and we really value your time and your comments, and it's something we all have to do, and I appreciate everyone's participation in that, and we'll move forward together. I see Jane's comment too. Sorry, reading the comments off to the side here.
No, you're good.
Happy to talk more about that too, Jane. And maybe we can touch on it at the next meeting when we dig into detail. Policy 10, this is kind of a next step type of slide. The tree canopy goal, and we talked a lot about it in this presentation, the 50 by 50 current goal. It's been there since 2011. I don't know if I mentioned that, but it was it was really developed in partnership with a public and private approach. Tree Charlotte was kind of born out of that effort, and there was a community-driven private sector discussion that was merged together with the city's public discussion, and council adopted that goal in 2011. And it's been 10 years. It's really time to look into that and formalize a new approach, not just for the goal, but just how we measure the goal and keep our finger on the pulse of what's happening for tree canopy. So making sure we have the appropriate level of data collection and analysis, planning for that, consider multiple targets across multiple scales, not just a high level across the city coverage approach. Maybe we keep that, maybe we don't, but let's dig into really finding a way to provide benefits to the community as best as we can in an equitable way. Regular canopy assessments, yeah, that's something we need to have a plan. And if we're partnering, with an entity like Tree Charlotte or other groups to make, sure that we're on top of this in a much more planned way. And to be honest, some of this stuff's already included in the current goal, but to stay committed, to make it flexible, and to make sure that we're open to having these difficult conversations as things change or need to change. That's a big part of it. It's just a greater commitment and making sure this doesn't get put on a shelf, and collectively we come back and have difficult discussions and make sure we're making sure the canopy goal is appropriate and the benefits that we can get out of that are being realized. Andrew, please add anything else to that.
No, that was good. So we've taken questions and comments as we've worked through it, but open to any other additional feedback or questions. I will scroll back through the chat to make sure we didn't miss anything, but if we did, feel free to unmute and jump in.
And I certainly welcome all types of comments, not just a very straightforward development reg type of approach. There were some ideas in that chat that were kind of programmatic in nature, and very happy to hear that too. I know there's some other city staff on the call who are listening in. Aaron Oliverio, Lori Reed, from the city arborist office. So we got all the main tree players here, and we're happy to hear anything now or offline. TCAP folks, I know you've put a lot of time in already, but I welcome anything else you got.
I'm good on my part. I thank you guys for the presentation, kind of letting everybody know what we've been up to, and look forward to the next session where we can kind of dive into the details a little bit more. I'm sure you'll have a lot more active conversation at that point.
Absolutely, yeah, and we're going to dive into the details, and we'll get right to the heart of some of these concepts that we introduced today. So thanks, Thomas. Appreciate that.
All right. Well, if there are no more questions.
Andrew, this is John Morris. As a member of the Ordinance Advisory Committee since 2016, I really thank everybody who's been on the tree aspect of this. It's a lot of work, and you really get into the weeds, so to speak. And hopefully everybody on this call is of one sort of common purpose, that we love trees. I've lived in Charlotte since 1977. My grandfather was a forester for the National Forest Service. I also happen to be a developer and a member of this community. And my biggest point for us all to think about is, as 60 new people a day, net new people move to Charlotte, how do we accommodate that growth? Because I don't think we can stop it. I don't think we want to stop it. And if we determine that we want to limit development and increase the tree requirements for developers, then we're saying we're going to limit density, and the 60 people aren't going to have anywhere to live in our city limits, and they're going to be pushed into outlying counties. And that's sort of my biggest point, is is the gun seems to be directed at developers, and we need to save more trees, which we do, and we need to pay more mitigation funds, which we do. And that's the problem, is when you build a house or you build an industrial building, which is what I do, or you build an apartment building, you knock down trees. And so my question to us all is, where do we replant those trees? How do we create an initiative where we're knocking on doors of our neighbors saying, hey, can we put a ginkgo in your, I know that a live oak or a pin oak just fell on your house or your car, and you don't want to put another tree in your front yard, but how do we plant a ginkgo, or how do we plant a smaller maturing tree in that same place? Because in answer to my question earlier, you said most of the tree loss was in areas of existing development as defined by not new development. So through organizations and grassroots efforts, through Tree Charlotte, I'm on the board of the Catawba Thread Trails, which is connected with the Catawba Lands Conservancy. How do we go to our neighbors as private citizens and get people to plant trees? Because if we want people to live inside the city limits and prevent sprawl and prevent traffic and congestion, we need to encourage development along transit corridors, not make it difficult because a heritage tree happens to be in the middle of my building footprint, and I hate tearing down that heritage tree. Make me plant 20 trees in lieu of that heritage tree. But let's focus on the solution not only being better development, and we developers owe it to our community. Beacon Partners owes it to our community to do great development, not meet minimum standards, but do it great. But give me an option, and give my fellow single family developers and apartment developers and office developers an option whereby we can pay into a fund that is really gonna replace the trees. And I heard in one of the OAC meetings when we were in person back in 2018, one of the neighbors in Barkley Downs said, golly, the developer paid $20,000 into a mitigation fund and the trees were planted in North Charlotte. You know, I want the trees to be replanted in my community. And I don't live in Barkley Downs, but I couldn't agree with them more. We got to get creative in our community where we replant trees in existing development areas, in our neighbors' backyards, in our own backyards. That is the biggest point of leakage that we can control without hampering the influx of people into our city, that the growth that we want, and pushing those peoples into outlying counties and creating the sprawl that's destroyed Atlanta, that's destroyed Southern California. So I'll get off my soapbox, but thank you for providing the opportunity.
Yeah,
and the service
John,
of everybody on this call.
John, following that, I think, especially with the mitigation and replanting, preventing the good at the expense of trying to achieve the perfect, or however they say it, I think is something we need to make sure that we avoid. I mean, I see replanting areas happening on school campuses and things like that. And I get it, hey, the government controls the property. We can make sure the trees don't get cut down, or we can get in there and maintain them and things like that. But I think there are plenty of opportunities, and there are plenty of willing property owners who'd say, yeah, I would love 4 or 5 trees. I've got all this land and nothing happening on it. And, great things can happen. Is it perfect? No. But is it good? And does it help the canopy? Yes.
Tim, I'm wondering if I could ask you and Andrew two short questions. The first one is, has the tree canopy action plan been presented to the council? When is it going to be presented to the council? And the second one, and I apologize for being such a dunce, but we've used the term tree canopy broadly in this entire conversation, which is fine because we do have that 50 by 50 goal. And you talked a little bit about the science involved with determining what that is with LIDAR and various other techniques. But for a layman like myself, if I'm looking down from the 30,000 foot level, when you say tree canopy, are you talking about the area within the canopy of the tree, which is to say you'd sort of calculate a square area from either a partially mature tree or a mature tree of certain species, and that's how you come up with the definition of tree canopy?
So, Walter, let me take the second part of that 2-part question first. Yeah, generally tree canopy is defined for analysis purposes and high level discussions. It's kind of a 2D thing, right? 2-dimensional. It's just what part of, in this case, Charlotte, is covered by tree canopy, just a square footage type calculation. And one of the themes that we're looking at in tcap, in the regulatory concepts we'll see at the next meeting in the programmatic areas, is just better defining and focusing on canopy, because it's not just as simple as the square foot coverage. If you have a lot of coverage of tree canopy by highly invasive, poor quality, undesirable trees, well, that value is certainly different than a contiguous canopy of mature willow oaks with healthy understory, where there's a lot of shade and air quality, water quality, wildlife quality benefits, and energy savings and things like that. So that's one of the elements, and it's our really first step in that direction as an organization, the city, to kind of get to tree canopy as a broader definition, as a more complex, scalable approach. Hopefully that makes sense. As far as council, yes, we have sent the tree canopy final report to council, and I'm not sure at this point if we're going to be presenting that to them, but they have been updated with the tcap policy recommendations.
Thank you. Good presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I'll just add to Matt and John's comments. I think that's where we're going. That's what we want to try and do. We understand, in this whole TCAP process, that all the competing priorities of, the things we want to do as a city and what we want to be. We don't just want to live in the forest. I mean, that if that were the case, we would, wouldn't be welcoming people into the city. We wouldn't have the job growth we have. Obviously, we want to do both in a way that makes sense. And hopefully you'll see that we've captured that in the standards. But I think what we also realize is what we said earlier. It's one leg of the stool of the approach of whatever we come up with, that they have to work together to balance all these priorities so that we can accommodate the types of things we want to accommodate as a city. So your comment is well received, and something we're working towards, and we need your help in. So I'll put that call out to say everything we present today and in weeks to come are up for comment and discussion. So nothing is final, and we really want to hear from you all as we work through these things. All right, I will turn it back over to Allison.
Thanks, Andrew. And actually, Ty is on, and I think he would like the opportunity to close us out. So I will turn it over to Ty. Thanks, everybody.
Hey, thanks, Allison. I appreciate that. Thank you, staff. Thank you, team, and Andrew, for your presentation and all the good questions. I just want to reiterate two things. John probably used a phrase that I will need for the next several days, and that is, we've got to be creative. I think that's a phrase that definitely we all need to be using, not just with the UDO, but pretty much how we're addressing all of these things, because growth isn't stopping, right? And we just have to learn to be able to quickly pivot, and we need you in really thinking outside the box to help us with that. So thank you very much for always thinking outside the box for us here. And then I can also emphasize what team's response to with regards to Walter's question. I believe we've been to council through TAP. Allison and team have presented to TAP about 2 times or so, and I believe council about the same number of times. We were actually planning to go to them back in May. Actually, no, back in April. But we decided to push that until you all have gone through some of these presentations, so it doesn't catch anyone of you by surprise. So I think over the next few weeks, we will be going back to them, and we definitely will let you know when we are taking the tree canopy action plan back to TAP and council in the near future. So once again, I want to thank all of you for getting your sleeves rolled up and if you're wearing long sleeves, to be able to really do this. I go back to the comprehensive plan quickly. So on Monday, the 17th, Council will be looking at taking some straw votes on some of what they decided to advance forward. And if any of those items take 6 or more votes, they will impact what comes in the second draft, which we should have on the 19th of May. When the second draft comes out, it will be available digitally, but we will make sure that everyone is aware. We'll send a blast email out. We will also have that on social media, so you all are aware. It will not be on all the 320 pages. It will only be on the specific pages where comments have been made and where we've responded to those. You'll be able to see them in track changes, so that way you can compare what's new to what's old. And then that will be out in the public realm for about 2 weeks. And during that period, on the 24th, we plan to go back to council to kind of update them on what we're hearing and how we're responding to whatever we're hearing in the middle of that 2-week period. So thanks for hanging in with us on this one. It's definitely not an easy process to follow, but we really need all the input and the fact that we just can't do business as usual. I know that on May 27th, the US Census will provide city level data. That will be the first time that we will have information with regards to what our growth is as a city compared to the last several years. And indications now really are telling us that that number will be probably higher than we thought, but we'll wait to see that. Essentially, we're growing, and we just definitely need to, again, be very creative in how we're approaching the issue of growth and development. So once again, thank you so much for spending your afternoon with us. Appreciate it. Thank you, Stan.
Thanks, Ty. Thanks, everyone.